much, first of all, ThoughtWorks, for inviting me. It's a real pleasure to be here and also an honor. So Sumit and Dinesh and Gunjan, who've really made my stay comfortable and made me feel so welcome, I'm really grateful to you. What I would like to confess before I start off is that this is the first time I'm actually going to talk to a hall full, I'm told it's about 1,200 of you, of IT people. So that's a really daunting, but also very exciting and challenging work for me, because I have actually never spoken to IT people. And you might be surprised because I'm going to talk about smart cities, but I really have no knowledge of IT or software. I come from a very different disciplinarian background. I have an architecture degree, but I've also done work with gender and social justice and citizenship. And my main focus and my main critique and examination of smart cities, whether India or globally, it's more to understand what do they really mean for citizenship, what do they really mean for rights, responsibilities, social justice, and so on and so forth. So one thing I need to say, I know you're all very late for lunch, you all must be really hungry, so I'm not going to try and take too much of your time. I'm just going to throw in some ideas. I cannot profess to be any expert in smart cities. These are just my initial explorations. And this comes from a kind of, what would I call it, a network that we have been setting up between India, South Africa, and UK, looking at smart cities, but primarily a set of workshops that we have organized in which we bring together a range of stakeholders, starting from government, policy, consultants, but also grassroots, NGOs, slum dwellers associations, and so on. And what we did is we made them sit around the table and talk about India's urban futures. So some of the stuff that I'm going to talk about today is going to be coming from that perspective. So the title of my talk today is Winners and Losers, #Citizenships in the Making of India's Smart Cities. And for those of you who don't know, I'm a reader in Urban Futures in King's College London, and that's the website address in which we've been running these blogs of all the stuff that we've been doing on our stakeholder workshops. I'm not going to actually give you answers of who's the winner and who's the loser. I'm really going to talk more about what does this mean, who might become a potential winner or a potential loser. So as the images show you, it's really about what's happening in India right now. And if you were to visit any Indian city today, and all of you come from different Indian cities, but as someone who lives abroad and who comes and visits India once in a while, there's one thing that really strikes me every time I come. It's the constant buzz of building activity. There's always construction going on. And actually, if you think about it, if you go to the West, if you go to Europe or to even the US, there is this whole talk and doom and gloom discussion of the recession, the economic crisis, the financial crisis, and austerity economies, particularly where I come from in the UK. So for India, and to see that kind of construction activity going on, it's quite surprising. And the bottom line, I think, what's going on here for anyone who comes to India once in a while to see this kind of construction, to see steel girders, fiber optic cables, BRTs, and so on, is to give a message that India is shining. And this India shining message is important because India is trying to be this global superpower, and it's trying to be this global superpower on the back of new city making, on the back of creating new smart cities. So it tries to present this kind of win-win situation through the production of new but also retrofitted 100 smart cities. But while construction has been a theme of India's liberalization since the 1990s, and cities have always been seen as the engines of economic growth, India is taking a very proactive approach to regional urbanization through creating smart cities. So all Indian cities, at least 100 Indian cities, will now be built in the image of a smart city. And the claim is that the production of these smart cities, which essentially is the coming together of ICT-driven urbanism, so ICT and urban planning, is going to make these cities more efficient, more governable, more transparent, more manageable. So the main thrust of the smart cities is really from the perspective of the city managers, city governors. So the Indian city, which is often seen as chaotic, haphazard, unplanned, will become planned, manageable, organized, sanitized, and so on. So it is really, I mean, to anyone else, it is a win-win situation. But my question here today is, who are the citizens of these smart cities? Who will reside in these smart cities? What kind of citizenship are we envisaging when we talk about ICT-driven urbanism or ICT-driven planning or ICT-driven governance? And more critically, how is the nature of the citizenship determined? How is this going to be measured, valued? And in doing so, what are we doing to the social, cultural, political rights, to democracy, and to citizenship rights that are associated with every ordinary citizen living in these cities? So in my talk today, what I want to do is I want to examine India's urban future, how it is represented and made real through fundamental transformation in its cities. And I argue that the fundamental transformation of Indian cities into smart cities is actually a fundamental transformation in the conditions and nature of citizenship itself. And I suggest what we see now unfolding in India's urban landscape is this notion of hashtag citizenship. And what do I mean by that? I think hashtag citizenship is a reduced and reductionist or a simplified version of the variety and diversity of citizenships that exist at the moment. It is a form of state-citizen relationship still, but it is a form of state-citizen relationship that is being increasingly pushed into the digital sphere, and it is reduced to the rights of digital access and responsibility of every citizen to contribute to data. So citizens become the data for the city to become governable and manageable. So hashtag citizenship becomes, therefore, the production of citizenship through the digital presence of ordinary citizens in a range of interactive apps, infographics, competitions, online consultations, and so on. And you can see some of these infographics over here. But who is the smart citizen? And we still haven't really managed to grasp that very well, because we're still grasping what is a smart city. The smart citizen is not actually a new label, although we hear that, we think we're hearing that very recently. There have been previous references to the net generation, to digital natives, to the millennials, to the Google generation, and these are all different versions of the smart citizen. But the smart citizen, the imaginary of the smart citizen in India, it revolves around a particular demographic of digital natives. And this is a loose group of young, upwardly mobile, middle classes who have been outspokenly supportive of the use of ICT and smart cities. And this is very important to understand, and it's very significant at the moment that we are in now in the 21st century, because India is set to become the youngest country in the world by 2020, with 64% of its population in the working age. So 64% of 1.2 billion population is going to be in the working age by 2020, and that's huge. That's a hugely significant transformation in India's demographics. But also, for the first time in its history, this population, this Indian youth population, and some of you belong to that generation, and this is in no way a negative statement, but it is a fact, and it is a reality at the moment, that this young population that has become the net generation is going to outnumber its aging population, and also it'll therefore put enormous pressure on India's economy for employment and prosperity. But this young population there's also particular social cultural features, because this population has grown up, largely grown up in India, which has been largely peaceful. So they haven't gone through the trauma of partition, they haven't gone through the severe communal riots that marked 1984, 1992, and so on. And Leila Fernandez, who's quite an authority on the Indian middle class, she suggests that this population are growing up in a techno world of newfound online and offline consumer identities. And therefore, they're very quick to absorb the public circulation of the idealized images of the benefits of ICT-driven urbanism. And this young population it's very interesting, because they are able to therefore ignore the earlier historic social and political and cultural inequalities, because they don't have any active memory of shortages, of rationing, of violence, and so on. Although you always hear about it, they haven't actually directly necessarily experienced it. So this is the demographic that we are talking about, and this is the demographic that has become actively supportive and actively recruited to become part of this landscape of smart citizenship. So the key area of the redefinition of citizenship into smart citizenship is digital space. And this is evident in the proliferation of infographics and visualizations. So citizen data has become really, really important, in which a space is created where the citizen contributes their data. So you see these public portals, such as the smart city consultations of the MOUD, where it is often highlighted the number of interactions or engagements that the state had with the citizen in digital space. And that's very interesting. Okay, so many Facebook likes, so many Twitter retweets, so many blogs, so many posters, and so on and so forth. And it's really interesting that the smart city idea has been able to mobilize such a big demographic profile and instantly fast-tracked a number of citizens into digital space. But what I'm arguing is that citizens have also become data to be recruited for the benefit of a particular type and imaginary of what the city should look like, should feel like, and should be like in the future. In this imaginary, the citizen does not necessarily possess any knowledge of the technical rationalities of what a smart city will be like, or any understanding of some of the challenges or weaknesses, or even some of the dark sides of using ICT for governance. But the citizen is seen as this naive, ordinary citizen who needs to be explained this through simplified images and videos. So we see something like this, an infographic which shows what a smart citizen looks like. As life turns smart citizens will make smart cities. And I'm sorry for the quality of the visual. You probably can't read all the details of it, but it says what simply smart citizen, what are their thoughts and what are their actions. So it's trying to train ordinary citizens to become a particular type of citizen, a particular type of smart citizen who can contribute to the smart city logics and the smart city. So these infographics create two types of citizen. One, as I've said before, citizen as data, and this one, citizen as discipline. So this creates a disciplined citizen who does the things that they're meant to do in order to make the smart city function. So this particular citizen has particular types of positive thoughts, be the change, advocate change, be clean, be sanitized, and all of these kinds of qualities which the smart city desires in order to create a perfectly smoothly functioning, rational, sanitized city. So these infographics, I argue, present two opposing conceptualizations of the city. One is the city as a machine. So the ICT drives the city like a machine. It needs this constant input of data, inflow of data, in order to function even as a smart city, because without data, you can't have smart city. You can't do the predictive analysis that you need to do in order to govern, to manage efficiently. But also, it presents the city simultaneously and paradoxically as an organism. So the city, if the technology and big data will make the smart city more machine-like, it is the smart citizen living in the city and performing his role, his or her role, in a particular way that makes it more human. So the smart citizen makes the machine-like city a more cosmopolitan, vibrant place to live in. But notice the infographic. The smart citizen is young, male, professional. So it automatically creates a particular profile, a particular gendered, a particular ethnic, a particular class profile of the smart citizen who's included in the city. So Indian smart cities are therefore marked by this paradox, and they're marketed also as part of this paradox, or what is understood as complementarity, constructing the presence of the smart citizen as a way to match the functional and technological conceptualization of smart cities. So this is very significant here, since there exists a deep chasm between these two smart city champions, between these two smart city imaginations. and the everyday struggles for citizenship rights among marginal populations. So it often creates this exclusionary smart city. This is an image I took in Chandigarh railway station, where Chandigarh is also gearing up to become a smart city. And you immediately see from the visual, hopefully I don't have to explain how it is exclusionary, where you see the poster about running for the smart city in Chandigarh, and immediately outside the frame of a poster, you have a homeless man sitting next to it in the Chandigarh railway station. So this kind of exclusion is also there marked in the digital divide, which you've been talking about today already. And indeed, in India, only 0.2 billion of the 1.2 billion strong population are connected to information and communication systems. This digital divide has been elaborated already, but I want to also note that the digital divide is geographical as well. It's across urban and rural populations. It's also across middle classes and slum populations. It's also social and economic. It's also very gendered. So it's important to understand that the digital divide is also not universal. And by suggesting that the digital divide needs to be bridged, we also need to be aware of and understand and sensitive to the historical social marginalizations and inequalities that has actually reinforced this digital divide across different social groups. So critics of the smart city have argued, therefore, that it is not the smart citizen, but it's the ordinary citizen that makes the true intelligence of a city. So a smart city is only made by citizens who are active, who are conscious, who are critical, and not by citizens who just merely contribute their data without really understanding what it is going to be used for, and indeed become a part of the wheel of the governance system, rather than becoming citizens who constantly question the state and improve the state in the way that it delivers on justice, rights, and democracy. So the renewed faith in ICT-based planning and governance, which is what essentially the smart city is, it tries to address the symptoms but not the causes of the injustices in wider society. And further, the terms of the citizen participation that the smart city requires, it takes no account of these existing historical social marginalizations which always remain criminalized, which often also remain criminalized in India. For example, the rights of LGBT communities. So I want to move now quickly to the last part of my talk, to what I want to argue for is that we need to move from this smart city perspective to a more reflexive perspective of smart urbanism. And what is smart urbanism? Well, smart urbanism is different from smart cities, and that smart cities is a range of toolkits. It's a range of apps, infographics, simulations, software, and what have you, which is essentially trying to make the city more knowable, governable, manageable, and transparent for the city managers, for the governance, for the government. Smart urbanism is a more grassroots, bottom-up perspective, which intersects with the top-down perspective, but it is a feedback loop in which it is more reflexive, it's more critical, and it's more conscious. And smart urbanism is a kind of reflexive, conscious thought and praxis of using ICT that produces active citizens rather than citizen as data. So that's the difference. So where you have smart cities as a set of toolkits, which is used by software companies like IBM, Cisco, smart urbanism goes way more than that in becoming a critical feedback loop which produces active citizenship. So what I want to do now is to use 3 examples, and these are certainly not examples that are new. There's something that you have heard of, but I want to talk about them in a slightly different way, to think about what these can do, and these are just literally examples to think through some of the ways to produce active citizenship. Now, the first one is what you can think of as a way to bridge the digital divide. And the first one is perhaps the more radical one, in which I suggest that we don't necessarily always need ICT to produce active citizens. And this is a very old method. There's a very well-known method, particularly in development studies, of participatory planning. And this particular image comes from an NGO work called Hamara Bachpan. So basically, this again should be familiar to most of you, where slums and informal settlements are often not mapped in the city. And participatory planning, in this case, using children to map out their familiar landmarks, familiar buildings, familiar memories, familiar streets, and so on. They create a map, a thought map, or imagined experiential map of their own neighborhood. But the map also works in two different levels. The map, on the one hand, it allows the NGO or the slum community to advocate for their right to the city. So they take this to the municipality and say, well, you need to put this on the city map. And for those of you who saw when Aishar map first came about in Delhi, all of these slum settlements, and I was working in one of the slum settlements in South Delhi, you literally open the Aishar map and it's blank, as if nothing exists there. It's an empty piece of land. And this kind of participatory planning, which has now been happening in Mumbai, Delhi, and many other metropolitan cities, I think Hyderabad Urban Lab is doing that as well, is about claiming your right to the city by participatory planning, but by also using not necessarily those rational, technical, scientific survey methods, but by using memory, by using feelings, by using emotions to claim your right to the city. At another level, it also forms a very different kind of resistance, a very different kind of staking to citizenship. And it does so by actually acknowledging that memories matter, that belonging matters, that your childhood experience matters, because children are not usually understood or included in the process of planning. So the use of children in order to map their neighborhood is a very important step in acknowledging the future citizens of the city who would not normally have been acknowledged because they live in informal settlements. Now, there are other colleagues of mine who are actually using apps to do this. And this is where perhaps ThoughtWorks could think of, or maybe you're already doing this, where children are actually given apps and they take pictures and the GIS map it. And they're producing maps, particularly in areas which are being removed in order to make new cities. So one of the cases I know of is Lavasa, which is near Pune, where the children of the tribals who were removed from their land before Lavasa was built are now being given this app in which they go across the land and they actually map the features that they were there before the city was built, before they were removed and everything was cleared out from their homes and neighborhoods. So moving on, I want to go show you the second example, which is, again, something I'm sure all of you have seen, the top 10 tips to end rape. And this is because I continuously come across discussions of smart cities and the smart city logic, smart city debates, in which it seems that the smart city is only created in the public realm. And for me, this is a very problematic assumption because, particularly if you're interested in gender, if you're interested in knowledge, power, citizenship, the equal participation in public sphere does not happen without removing inequalities and unequal gender power relationships within the family and neighborhood and community. So to me, equal participation and democracy and rights exist in the public sphere insofar as it exists in the private sphere. It cannot exist. We can't stop rape with an app. We can only stop rape if we change people's mindsets. And that happens when within families, within communities, within homes, within neighborhoods. And this particular poster, which went viral on Twitter, I don't know if anyone has seen it, I'm sure you have, was really targeting not women, but men, and to talk about how men can change their mindsets. And this is where, again, I think you don't really need ICT as a huge intervention. ICT can be part of the social media, but you need to think about ways of educating men, boys, mothers in the way they differentially treat their daughters and sons, and so on, within the homes, within the families. You need to think about ways that software can deal with domestic violence rather than seeing violence or sexual violence as something that happens only in the public realm or happens only by strangers. Violence, actually, sexual violence, gender violence, happens mainly within the domestic realm, mainly
from people who know you well, from family, from kinship structures, from communities, and so on. So how is it possible to produce a kind of smart urbanism that deals not just with the public realm, but focuses on the private realm? Because it is in the private realm that women or children are empowered. And it's only when they're empowered in the private realm can they then enter the public realm to stake their right to the city. So that is the second one. And then the final one that I want to leave you with is a possibility of, since ThoughtWorks says revolution as your last keyword, is the possibility to think about ICT as revolution, and not necessarily revolution in which we bridge the digital divide, but actual physical revolution. And I think the Occupy movement is a very good example of that, and I'm sure there are so many others in India, and it's happening all the time. But the Occupy movement was quite significant and quite interesting because it wasn't just an urban movement. It began with the hashtag Occupy, began with We Are the 99% hashtag, but it also became a global movement in which it went all across the different cities in the world. And what was also interesting and important is that the Occupy movement was using the methods and tools of capitalism to actually turn capitalism on its head, to actually challenge capitalism. So where is the radical politics that we can engage in using ICT, which is not just about tweaking things, but it's actually radically changing things, it's actually questioning things and turning things on its head, not accepting the status quo, not accepting business as usual and trying to tweak things within the business as usual. Where can we use and how can we use ICT to create these kinds of global social movements, global radical politics that would turn things on its head? And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.